Part 1: The Mark. The first thing I filmed that morning was a boot. It was a good boot. Hand-stitched, oxblood, the kind of leather that costs more than a camera body, and it came down on the mark, that pale groove worn into the Kingsway stone by 200 years of the palace guard walking the same 1,200 paces from the barrack arch to the forecourt gates, and it stayed there. "Are you rolling?" Doran Kesh asked without turning his head. "I'm rolling," I said. "Then don't stop rolling. Whatever happens, that's what I pay you for." I want to be honest about myself at the start, because everything I did later has to be measured against what I was. My name is Corin Ashby. I hold a camera for money. I had held it for 11 years by then, mostly for people who wanted to be seen being important, and I had learned to be a very good pair of hands and a very quiet mouth. When Kesh's people found me, the fee they offered for 4 days of filming was more than I had made in the previous 6 months, and I did not ask a single question about what I would be pointing the lens at. I did not ask because I did not want to hear an answer that would make me refuse. So, a boot on the mark at 9 minutes past 10 in the morning, in the cold spring light of Harrogate, with the palace towers gone gray-gold behind the mist, and the crowd already 3 deep along the rope. And behind the boot the man. Doran Kesh was 51, and built like a bollard, short, thick, immovable, a body designed by a lifetime of standing his ground in rooms where other men wanted him gone. He owned ships. 40 of them, I was told, out of the Velamer Republic across the water, and a warehouse district, and a bank that owned the men who owned other banks. He wore a charcoal coat with the collar up and a hat he never quite put on, and he had the particular calm of a man who has not been genuinely contradicted since he was 22. He had come to Eldermore for a trade charter. 6 days of meetings with the Crown's Commerce Office, a signature at the end of it, and a great deal of money moving in a direction he liked. The filming was for his own use, a private record, his people called it, though I understood by the second day that private meant released when it flatters him. The guard's walk was not on the itinerary. It was Farron Ostrey's idea. Ostrey was Kesh's man for everything unpleasant, long, gray, apologetic in his shoulders and merciless in his eyes, and he had spent the whole trip half a step behind Kesh's left elbow. The night before, at a dinner I filmed and did not eat, Ostrey had been telling a story about the palace guard, how they marched a fixed route, how by ancient standing order they did not break formation, did not stop, did not go around, how they simply came on, and everything in the world got out of their way. "Everything," Kesh had said. "So they say." "No, sir. They go around," Kesh said. He turned his glass in the candlelight. "They tell you they don't. Every institution tells you that. It is the first lie a wall tells a wave. And then a man stands there with lawyers and a name and a great deal of money, and the wall discovers it has a door in it after all." Bloy, the third of them, a young man with a soft, fat laugh and a habit of agreeing before he understood, said something about how it would make a fine piece of film. "It would," Ostrey said carefully. "I don't recommend it." "Noted," said Kesh, and I saw him decide, and I saw Ostrey see him decide, and neither of us said the word that should have been said, which was no. There was a wager by the end of the evening. Bloy offered 10,000 crowns that Kesh would step aside. Kesh took it and doubled it, and I sat in the corner with a dead camera on my knee and let it happen, because I was hired hands, and because 20,000 crowns is a very long way from a man who has never had more than a month's rent in reserve. That is my part. I am not proud of it. Now the Kingsway and the boot on the mark. The guard's walk is not a road. That is the thing visitors never understand until they are standing in it. It is a stone causeway 30 feet wide, running dead straight from the barrack arch, under the old bell tower, past the Bellgate steps, and into the palace forecourt, and it is the only ground in the capital where the crowd stands behind a rope and the rope is not a suggestion. Twice a day the column crosses it. 52 men in the change of guard in fours in step, with the drums behind them. And once the column enters the Kingsway, it does not stop. Not for a dropped hat, not for a fallen umbrella, not for a man. That is not swagger. I learned why later, and when I learned it, I was ashamed of every clever thing I had ever thought about ceremony. At the head of the rope stood a woman in a green sash, holding a clipboard she never looked at, watching the crowd the way a farrier watches a horse's ears. Sella Quint, Route Marshal, Kingsway section, 19 years in the post, 50-odd gray at the temples, a voice like a gate closing. She saw Kesh's boot on the mark before I had even framed the shot. Sir, she was there in 4 strides. Behind the rope, please. Kesh did not move. He looked at her with a mild, pleasant interest, the way you might look at a bird that had landed on your table. Is this a public thoroughfare? He asked. It is a crown way, sir, and it is closed for the column, behind the rope. That isn't what I asked. It's the answer you're getting. I had my eye to the finder. I remember the composition because it was beautiful and because I hated myself for noticing. The ropes, the gilded railing, the tall gray stone, the 2 of them squared off on the pale groove, and behind them, far down at the barrack arch, a suggestion of red. Madam, Kesh said, I am going to stand here. I am not going to shout. I am not going to touch anyone. I am not going to carry a weapon or a banner or a grievance. I am going to stand on a public stone in a friendly city, and in about 4 minutes some very well-dressed young men are going to walk around me, as men have walked around me my entire life. And then I am going to go and have my lunch. They will not go around you, said Sella Quint. They will. Sir, she took a breath, and I have thought about that breath a great many times since. I am giving you a formal warning. That is 1. I am permitted to give you 3. After the 3rd, I am obliged to call the palace constables, and after that it is out of my hands and out of yours. Then give me the other 2, Kesh said, and let's all be efficient. Ostry came forward then. He came forward the way a man walks onto ice. Sir, if I might, the charter signs on Thursday. If there is any kind of incident. Farron. Sir. Do you know why the charter signs on Thursday? Kesh said. It signs because they want my ships in their harbor more than I want their harbor under my ships. That is the whole of it. That is the only sentence in the whole of commerce. When you understand that, you will stop being frightened of small men in braid. He glanced at Quint. No offense intended, madam. None taken, sir, she said, 2. Bloy laughed. It came out of him like a hiccup, and a woman in the crowd shushed him, and I panned professional, unforgivable, smooth as oil from Bloy's grinning face down the length of the Kingsway to the barrack arch, where the red had become a shape, and the shape had become men. 52 of them. 4 abreast, 13 ranks deep, and a color sergeant on the flank whose voice I could not yet hear. You do not really see the palace guard until you see them coming at you down a straight line of stone. In photographs they are a costume. In the flesh, from the front, they are a fact. The bearskins turned 52 men into 52 black columns, and the red tunics turn them into one long moving wall, and the boots come down together so precisely that the sound arrives at your chest before it arrives at your ears, and the whole of it, the gold, the white gloves, the rifles at the slope, moves at a pace no man in the whole procession chose, because the pace is older than any of them. I remember thinking, he will move. Of course he will move. Everyone moves. 3, said Sella Quint. Sir, I am calling it in. Do, said Kesh, and settled his weight and put his hands in his coat pockets and smiled at the crowd and said loudly for the phones, because he knew the phones were up. He had counted on the phones. They'll go around me. Everything goes around me, and if I break anything, I'll pay for it. The crowd laughed. Some of it was nervous laughter, and some of it was the other kind, the kind that likes a bull in a china shop as long as it isn't their china. Along the rope, 200 bright rectangles came up. All of them pointed at the same immovable little man on the pale stone groove. and in my viewfinder, framed dead center behind him, the column came on. I need to tell you about the guard, and I need to do it now, because in 4 minutes there will be no time. His name was Imrais Tarn, and I had filmed him the day before without knowing his name or caring. Kesh had wanted footage at the sentry boxes, the little stone alcoves at the forecourt gates where a single guardsman stands his hour. It is the tourists' favorite theater. They lean in. They pull faces. They shout, they sing, they hold up phones an inch from a man's chin strap. They make the same 3 jokes that have been made every day for 100 years, and the guardsman looks through them at a point on the far wall and does not exist. Kesh had done his version of it. He was not vulgar. Vulgar men can be dismissed. Kesh knew that. He had stood in front of the box with his hands behind his back and talked to the man in the alcove in a low, friendly, reasonable voice for 11 minutes, and what he had said, in 100 different arrangements, was this: "You are furniture. You are a hired ornament in a costume. You do not choose your standing or your going or your speaking, and if I stood here all day, you could not so much as tell me to go away." He had waited. I had rolled. And the guardsman in the alcove, a big-shouldered man, 30 or so, with a jaw like the corner of a building and eyes that were somewhere else entirely, had not moved a hair, not a blink out of rhythm, not a tightening at the mouth. He looked through Doran Kesh the way the sea looks through a swimmer. When Kesh finally walked away, he was in a very good humor. It took me until that night, watching the footage back for the edit, to understand what I had actually recorded. A man being told he was nothing by an expert for 11 minutes and refusing to be made anything at all. I froze the frame. I remember the time code, and I remember, because I have watched it 1,000 times since, that in the last second before Kesh turned away, the guardsman's eyes had come off the far wall and crossed Kesh's face, for perhaps a quarter of a second, no more, and gone back. Not anger. I have looked at that quarter second in a dark room until my eyes burned, and it is not anger. It is the look a man gives a hazard on a road he will have to drive again. 1,200 paces is nothing. From the barrack arch to the forecourt is about 1 minute and 40 seconds at the column's pace, and the column had already eaten half of it. Sella Quint was on her radio, walking backwards down the rope line, her voice flat and fast. "Kingsway, Marshal Quint, I have an obstruction on the mark, single mail, refusing 3 warnings, requesting constables to the Belgate steps immediately. I say again, immediately." The crowd had understood by then that this was not a joke that would end in a joke. You could feel it change. The phones went from laughing to hungry. Somebody near me said, "He's actually going to stand there," in the voice of a man who has just seen a dog run into traffic. Ostry took hold of Kesh's sleeve, actually took hold of it. In 4 days, I had not seen him touch the man. "Doran, please." Kesh looked down at the hand on his sleeve, and Ostry let go as though the coat had bitten him. Bloy had stopped laughing. His face had gone the color of paper, and he was backing away towards the rope with his hands half up, saying, "It's fine, it's the bet's off, Doran, the bet's off." "The bet," said Kesh, "is not off." I could hear the drums now, not as sound as pressure. The Kingsway is a canyon of old stone, and it takes the beat and folds it and hands it back at you from the walls. So it comes at your body from 3 directions, and it is always a fraction faster than your heart, which is a trick I do not think anyone designed, and which works on every human being who has ever stood there. 60 paces. And Color Sergeant Brannock Vey, on the right flank of the column, saw the obstruction. I have seen the footage, my own footage, enough times to know exactly what happened next, and I will set it down in the order it happened, because the order matters. It mattered later, in a room with a bench and a rail and a woman in dark red who decided the rest of my life. Vey did not break stride. He turned his head 1/4, and his voice came out over the drums with no strain in it at all, the way a bell has no strain in it. "Make way for the guard." The crowd shrank back against the rope so hard that a barrier went over somewhere behind me. Kesh put his hands deeper in his pockets. 40 paces. Make way for the guard. 20. And I will tell you what I was doing at 20 paces, and I will not dress it up. I was framing. I had gone to a knee for the low angle, because the low angle would put the bearskins against the sky, and I had my left hand under the lens and my right on the barrel, and I was breathing out slowly to hold the shot steady, and my heart was going like a hammer, and I was thinking, God forgive me, I was thinking, this is going to be the most valuable 4 minutes I have ever shot. And Doran Kesh on the mark at 10 paces, with 52 men coming down on him in step, did something I did not expect. He closed his eyes. Not in fear. I have looked at it and looked at it. He closed his eyes the way a man closes his eyes to prove he is not looking. The front rank came on. And in the right-hand file of the front rank, 4 feet from the pale groove in the stone, was the guardsman from the sentry box. Part 2, 4 seconds. Here is what the world saw later, in a clip 9 seconds long that 11 million people watched before breakfast. A man stands on a stone. A wall of red comes at him. There is a shout. The wall does not stop. There is a shoulder, a lurch, a coat spinning like a thrown sack, and the man goes down hard on his hands and knees on the cobbles as 52 pairs of boots go through the space where he had been. He kneels there with his hat gone and his hair over his face and his palms bleeding, and the drums keep going, and nobody helps him, and the column recedes up the Kingsway with its rifles perfectly aligned as though nothing at all had happened, because as far as the column was concerned nothing had. 9 seconds. It is a savage little piece of film. It is also, and I say this as a man who cuts film for a living, who knows exactly what 9 seconds can be made to mean. A lie so complete that it took a crown tribunal, a ruined man, and the last shred of my own courage to undo it. Because what happened took 4 seconds, and the 9-second clip does not contain them. What happened was this. At 5 paces, Color Sergeant Vay gave the last call, and this one had a different shape in it, a crack like a rope going tight. Make way. At 3 paces, Doran Kesh, eyes shut, hands in his pockets, did not move. At 2 paces, the men of the front rank did the only thing that 52 men in step on a straight stone way can do, which is keep going. Understand me. They could not stop. Not would not, could not. There were 12 ranks behind them at 116 paces to the minute, 400 pounds of man and rifle in every rank, and the man in the second rank cannot see the stone under the boots of the man in front of him. If the front rank checks, the second rank walks into it, and the third into the second, and a column of 52 men becomes a pile of 52 men, in bearskins blind with rifles, on a stone way with a crowd on both sides. I did not know that then. I knew it later. I knew it the way you learn everything that matters, which is too late and from a stranger. At 1 pace, Guardsman Emrise Tarn, right file, front rank, 4 feet of empty air between his shoulder and a stationary human being, did something that was not in the standing orders of the palace guard, and that could have ended his career on the spot. He turned his shoulder down. That is all. In the raw footage it is nothing. You would not see it if you did not know to look. He dropped his right shoulder perhaps 4 inches out of the line and rolled it forward, and as the column ate the space between them, his shoulder took Doran Kesh across the chest and lifted, and the lift threw Kesh up and out, sideways, off the mark, off the center line, out of the path of the 12 ranks coming behind, and put him down on his hands and knees on the cobbles, a full body's length clear of the boots. The 9-second clip begins at the shoulder. It does not show the 4 warnings. It does not show the rope. It does not show Sella Quint's 3 fingers held up in the air. It does not show a man closing his eyes on purpose. And it does not show, because you cannot show a thing that did not happen, what a column of 52 men does to a stationary body it cannot see and cannot avoid. When the man in the front rank keeps his shoulder square and his eyes forward, and lets the standing orders do the work, as he is entitled to do, as some men would have done, as I have been told by more than one soldier since that day they would have done. Imrais Tarn had one option that day that was not in his orders, and he took it, and it cost him nearly everything he had. He threw Dorankesh clear. The column did not slow. It went up the Kingsway and under the bell tower and through the forecourt gates, and the drums went with it, and the sound of it drained out of the street like water out of a basin, and what was left behind on the cobbles was a middle-aged man on all fours with blood on both palms and no hat. I was still rolling. That is the thing I would take back if I could take back one thing. Not the wager, not the 4 days, not the silence at dinner. I would take back the fact that a man was on his knees 6 feet from me, and I did not put the camera down. Seloquent reached him first. She went down on one knee beside him, and she was not gentle and she was not cruel. She was a professional, and she checked him the way you check a load that has shifted. "Sir, look at me. Can you feel your feet? Move your fingers." Kesh said nothing. He was breathing in a strange, high, snatching way, and he was staring at the cobbles 4 inches from his nose as though something was written there. "Sir, answer me." "Get away from me," said Dorankesh. And then he got up. He got up badly in stages, one hand on the cobbles and one on his knee, and his coat was torn open at the shoulder, and his hair was hanging, and his palms were red. And when he lifted his face, I saw a thing I had never seen on it and would never see again. Nothing. There was nothing there. It was a face that had been emptied. Then it filled up, and what it filled up with was rage, but not hot rage, not the shouting kind. It came into him coldly from underneath, and it made him neat again. I watched him put his hair back with his bleeding hand. I watched him straighten his collar. I watched him look up the Kingsway at the tail of the column going through the gates, and I watched him find, in the whole length of that receding red wall, the single man whose shoulder had touched him. "That one," he said. "Sir," said Seloquent, standing, "you are being detained. Palace constables are." "That one," Kesh said again, to nobody, to the street, to the 200 phones. He pointed up the Kingsway with a red palm. "He struck me. You all saw it. That man in the red struck me." And 200 phones drank it down. The palace constables took him at the Belgate steps, and they took him without drama and without deference, which I think shocked him more than the cobbles had. 2 of them, a big quiet one and a small quick one, and they said, "Sir, you're under caution for obstruction of a royal column." And he said, "Do you know who I am?" And the small quick one said, "Yes, sir." And that was the whole conversation. They took Austria as well for a statement. They took Bloy, who was crying. They took me, because I had a camera on my shoulder and had been standing inside the rope line, and because, as the big quiet one put it, without any particular malice, "You'll have it all on there, won't you, sir?" I said I had. I said it before I had thought about it, which is the only honest thing I did that morning. The Kingsway guardhouse is a low stone room under the bell tower with a scarred table and 8 chairs, and a window with bars that are more of a memory than a security measure. They put us in there and they left the door open, which was somehow the most humiliating thing of all, and a palace surgeon came and cleaned Kesh's hands and put dressings on them and said, "Grazes, you've had worse shaving." And Kesh looked at him with such concentrated hatred that the man actually laughed. An officer came at 11:30. Captain Lyle Orick, palace guard, young for the rank, narrow, with a way of standing that made you conscious of your own posture. He had a folder. He put the folder on the table and did not open it. "Mr. Kesh," he said, "you are a guest of this realm and you are in a great deal of trouble, and I am going to spend the next 5 minutes trying to get you out of it, which is more than you deserve. Will you listen?" Kesh looked at the wall. Obstruction of a royal column is a summary offense. The fine is 200 crowns. There is a form. You sign it, you pay it, you write one line acknowledging that you were warned and did not comply, and you walk out of that door, and on Thursday you sign your charter and nobody in your republic ever hears a word about this. That is the whole of it. 200 crowns and a line." There was a long silence. Ostry was staring at the table with his eyes closed, and I could see him praying in his own way, which was a kind of arithmetic. "And the man who struck me," said Kesh. "No man struck you." 52 witnesses, said Kesh, "and 200 cameras." 52 witnesses, said Oric, who were in step in ranks with their eyes on the man in front of them. "Sir, listen to me. I am not going to argue with you about what happened. I am telling you what will happen. If you sign the form, this is a fine. If you make a complaint against a guardsman, this becomes an inquiry, and an inquiry is a very large and very slow machine, and it does not care whose ships are in whose harbor, and it will take you apart along with him. It will subpoena your movements. It will subpoena your associates. It will subpoena," and his eyes came round to me without hurry, "every second of film that was shot on that stone this morning. Do you understand what I am offering you?" I did not understand. I thought he was threatening us. It was months before I understood that Captain Lyle Oric was, in that stuffy little room with the door open, trying to save Doran Kesh's life. The only life Kesh had, which was his name, and that he was doing it because a palace officer is trained to prevent an avoidable catastrophe, even when the catastrophe is walking towards him with its hands in its pockets. "His name," said Kesh. "Sir." "The man in the front rank, the right-hand one, what is his name?" Oric looked at him for a while. "Guardsman Emrys Tarn," he said, 19 years' service. 6 of them in the line regiments, and I would not, if I were you, spend a great deal of time thinking about what those 6 years were." 200 crowns, said Kesh softly, and I saw him taste it, and I saw him find it bitter beyond bearing. 200 crowns. To a man who had lost 20,000 on a wager the night before without blinking. 200 crowns and one written line. I was warned and I did not comply. He would have paid 200,000. He would have paid 2 million. He would have paid anything at all except the line. "I want an advocate," he said. Oric closed his eyes for exactly as long as it takes a man to swallow something. Then he opened them and stood, and picked up his unopened folder. "You are entitled to one," he said. "Mr. Ashby, a word outside." He walked me out into the arch, where the wind came through cold, and he stood looking up at the bell tower with his hands behind his back. "You filmed it?" "Yes, sir." "All of it from before?" "From before he stepped over the rope, from the boot down." "Continuous?" "Continuous," I said. "One take, 4 minutes and some." Something went out of Captain Oric's shoulders that I had not noticed was in them. "Then say so when you are asked," he said. "And Mr. Ashby, do not cut it. Do not tidy it. Do not color it or grade it or trim the head of it. Whatever you are asked for and by whom, that file is now evidence in a Crown matter, and if a single frame goes missing from it, you will not be a witness any more. You will be a defendant." "I understand." "You do not," he said quite kindly, "but you will." He started away and then he stopped, and he turned around and he said the thing that changed everything, though neither of us knew it yet. "You were low," he said, "weren't you, on your knee on the right at the rope?" "Yes, sir." "Then you may be the only camera in the capital that was under the line of the bearskins." He nodded slowly to himself. "Everything else will have shot it from up here." He raised a flat hand to his own eye level. "From up here, at that angle, with the column filling the frame, you cannot see the guardsman's shoulder at all. You cannot see anything but a man falling down. Do you follow me?" I did not then. "No, sir." "You will," said Captain Lyle Oric, and went back inside. Part 3, 9 seconds. The clip went out at 4:41 that afternoon. It did not come from a tourist. That is the first thing anyone should understand about it, and it is the thing the realm took longest to learn. 40 tourists filmed that morning, and every one of their films is a shaky, sideways, half-obscured mess in which you cannot tell a shoulder from a rifle butt. 40 amateur films did not bring down a guardsman. One professional one did. Nils Garrow was Kesh's publicist. He flew in that afternoon on a chartered aircraft, and he was in the suite at the Ambassador Hotel by 3, and by 4:30 he had done what a competent man with a good machine can do in 90 minutes. He had gathered the crowd footage. He had found the 2 angles that told the story he wanted. He had cut them together. He had stabilized them. He had graded them cold and gray. He had laid a low, sick drone under them, and he had built 9 seconds. A man stands. A wall of red comes. A shoulder. A man on his knees bleeding alone. Under it 4 words, "He never touched them." I was in the room. I want that on the record too. I was in the room, sitting on a hotel sofa with my camera bag between my feet and a card in my pocket, and I watched a stranger take a morning I had lived through and turn it inside out, and I said, "That isn't what happened," exactly once, in a voice that I could barely hear myself. Garrow did not even look up. "It's every frame real," he said. "Not one thing in there is fake. Check it." "You started it at the shoulder." "I started it where it gets interesting." He was warned 3 times. He stepped over a rope. There's a marshal in my footage holding up 3 fingers. "Then that's context," said Garrow pleasantly. "And context is a thing people say when the picture's already beaten them." And Kesh, at the window with his bandaged hands behind his back, said, without turning, "Send it." I have tried since to be exact about what happened to the realm in the next 4 days because I think people misremember it. They remember it as a wave of hatred. It was not at first. It was worse than that. It was a wave of decency pointed in the wrong direction. You have to see it as an ordinary person saw it. 9 seconds. A man on his knees bleeding on the stones. A wall of armed men walking through him without breaking step. Whatever he did, and the clip is careful, so careful never to say he did nothing, only to leave the space where the reason should be. Whatever he did, does a man deserve to be walked through? Is that what the uniform is for? Would they have done it to you? Would they have done it to your father? That is not a stupid question. That is a good question, asked in good faith, by hundreds of thousands of people who had been handed a lie shaped exactly like an answer. By the 2nd day it was everywhere. By the 3rd there were 3 separate broadsheets running the still frame, the one with Kesh's palms and his bare white head, under headlines about a guard that had forgotten who it serves. By the 4th, a member of the Commons bench stood up and asked, in the tone of a man who has found a use for something, whether the standing orders of the palace guard were fit for a modern realm, or a relic that grinds ordinary men under its heel. And on the 5th day, Doran Kesh, bandaged, grave, magnificently plain in a black coat, standing on the steps of the Ambassador with Perrin Slade at his elbow, filed a formal complaint of assault against guardsman Imrise Tarn, and a civil suit against the household for 11 million crowns, and told 100 cameras, in a voice that shook in exactly the right place. "I am not a poor man. I do not need their money, and I will not keep a penny of it. But there is a boy somewhere in this realm who will stand in that street next year, and he will not have ships, and he will not have advocates, and when they walk through him there will be nobody at all to say a word. I am saying the word. That is all I am doing. I am saying the word." It was superb. I stood in the press pen with my own camera on my shoulder. Garrow had insisted. The loyal cameraman, the man who was there, and I filmed him say it, and my hands were shaking so badly that the shot is unusable. Because I had the 4 minutes, I had them in my pocket. I had had them for 5 days. Perrin Slade was the finest advocate in the Republic and possibly in the world. And the first thing he did was the thing I should have expected and did not. He came to me. Not aggressively. Slade never did anything aggressively. That was the horror of him. He was a soft, round, courteous man with reading spectacles and a voice like a hand on your shoulder, and he sat down opposite me in the hotel's tea room with a folder and asked me how I was sleeping. Badly, I said. Yes, he said with real sympathy. It is a great deal to carry an eyewitness account, especially when one is not certain what one saw. May I show you something? He turned the folder around. It was my contract. 4 days of principal photography, day rate, expenses, the usual. And halfway down the second page, in the flat gray language of a clause nobody reads, because nobody has ever needed to. All footage, raw or edited, exposed or captured by the contractor in the course of the engagement, together with all media and copies thereof, shall be the sole and exclusive property of the client from the moment of capture. The contractor shall deliver all such media to the client on demand, and shall retain no copy of any kind. You signed this, said Perrin Slade gently, on the 11th. Here is your hand. I looked at my hand on the page. It is a bad signature. It always has been. I want you to understand, he said, that nobody is threatening you. I would be ashamed to threaten you, and it would be quite unnecessary. I am simply telling you what is true, which is that the 4 minutes in your pocket are not your 4 minutes. They have never been your 4 minutes. They belong to Mr. Kesh at the instant the light hit the sensor. If you hand that card to the household, you are not a brave witness. You are a man in breach of a commercial contract, disposing of property that is not his, in a foreign realm with no assets and no standing, against a client with 40 ships and a great many friends. You will not go to prison. You will simply never be paid to hold a camera again anywhere by anyone for the rest of your life. And he took off the spectacles and folded them, and I remember hating him for how sad he looked. Your account of that morning will be reported, quite accurately, as the account of a disgruntled contractor who stole from his employer. Which will be the truth, Mr. Ashby. That is the difficulty. It will actually be the truth. I said, there's a Crown officer who told me it's evidence. There is, Slade agreed. And in about 11 weeks, a tribunal may or may not compel its production, and lawyers will argue about ownership and privilege and jurisdiction, and I am rather good at that argument, and you will be in the middle of it with no money. He put the spectacles away. Or, you may deliver the media to your client, as you are contractually obliged to do, and be paid the remainder of your fee and go home, and be a man who held a camera on a bad day and had nothing to do with any of it. Which is also true. Both things are true, Mr. Ashby. That is what nobody tells you about the truth. There is generally more than enough of it to go round. He stood and buttoned his coat. Take a few days, he said. Nobody is in a hurry, only do try to sleep. They suspended Imrais Tarn on the 6th day. Not dismissed. Suspended from public duty pending the finding of a household inquiry, which is a form of words that means, we do not think you did anything wrong, and we cannot afford to be seen standing next to you. I found that out the way everyone found it out, from a 2-line notice, and I did a thing then that I still cannot entirely explain. I went to the Kingsway. It was raining. The mark was dark with wet, and there was nothing there to see, no chalk outline, no mark of any kind, just a worn groove in old stone, the width of a boot, that 100 generations of boots had made. There was a rope and a crowd behind the rope, and the crowd was different now. Half of them had come to boo. They booed. When the column came down under the bell tower with the drums behind it, 40 or 50 people along the rope line booed a body of men who could not answer, and a woman near me shouted, "Murderers," which was so absurd, so completely detached from any fact of any kind, that I laughed out loud and then wanted to be sick. Sella Quint was at the head of the rope in her green sash, exactly where she had been, watching the crowd the way she always watched the crowd. Her jaw was set. She had been named in 3 broadsheets by then as the marshal who did nothing. She, who had given 3 warnings and called it in and knelt on the stones with her hands on the man's back. When the column had gone through, I went to her. "Marshal Quint." She looked at me for a good long moment. She knew my face. She had seen it on one knee at the rope with a lens where a conscience should have been. You're his camera, she said. I was there. I know what you were. She looked back at the crowd. You still have it then, the film. I said nothing, which was an answer. 19 years I've walked this rope, said Seloquent. You know how many people I've pulled back off that mark? Hundreds, drunks, lovers having a row, a lad on a dare, a woman who'd had bad news and just stopped in the middle of the way and couldn't hear me. Every single one of them, I got them back behind the rope, and every single one of them is alive and never thinks about it. And I've never had so much as a thank you, and I've never wanted one. She turned her head. Do you know why the column doesn't stop, Mr. Ashby? Because it's the rule. No, she said, the rule is because. And she told me about Belgate. 19 years ago, on the same stones, in a crowd 4 times the size, a coronation year, a spring festival, the whole capital out in the street, a man fainted on the Kingsway in front of a marching column. Not a fool, not a protester, an old man with a bad heart who simply went down. And the front rank, seeing him, did the human thing, the kind thing, the thing every decent person watching would have begged them to do. They stopped. 12 ranks, said Seloquent. She was not looking at me. She was looking down the Kingsway at nothing, and her voice had gone very flat. 12 ranks behind them at 116 paces in bearskins. You cannot see the ground in a bearskin. You can't see the man in front of you below his shoulder blades. The second rank went into the first. The third went into the second. And on either side of them there was a crowd 8 deep. And the crowd surged, because when a column breaks, people run in. They always run in. They think they're helping, and the barrier came down at the Belgate steps, and 1,100 people went off a set of stairs onto a set of stairs. She stopped. 31 injured, she said. 9 of them badly, 2 of them children, and one of those 2 is 31 years old now and has never walked. The old man with the heart lived, as it happens. He died last winter in his bed, and he never once forgave himself, and there was nothing on God's earth for him to forgive. The rain came off the bell tower in a long gray sheet. That's the rule, said Seloquent. That's the whole rule. The column does not stop, the column does not break, the column does not go around, because the day it does, it isn't 52 men who pay for it. It's the 8 deep crowd that runs in to help. Your Mr. Kesh stood on that mark, and he thought he was testing whether a wall would open for him. She finally turned and looked at me, and her eyes were dry and terrible. He was standing on the throat of 1,100 people, and the only thing between them and the stairs was 52 men who had been ordered, in blood, never to move for him. And one of them moved anyway, 4 inches, just enough to throw him clear and keep the line. She let that sit. 20 years that man has served, she said. And they've put him behind a back gate at the tradesman's yard where nobody can see him, and the whole realm thinks he's a thug, and there is one man alive who can prove otherwise, and he is standing in front of me in a raincoat with his hands in his pockets, exactly like the last man who stood on that mark. And she walked away up the rope line to see to her crowd. Part 4, the back gate. I did not sleep that night, and at 6 in the morning I went to the tradesman's yard. It is on the north side, behind the kitchens, a cobbled square with a weighbridge and a smell of coal and cabbage where the carts come in. There is a gate, and beside the gate there is a post, and at the post there was a guardsman. No crowd, no rope, no photographs. Nobody comes to the tradesman's yard to see the palace guard. The tourists do not know it exists, and the carters go past a sentry every day of their lives the way you go past a lamp post. He stood there in the rain, in the full dress, immaculate, boots polished, chin strapped down, rifle at rest, eyes on a point on the far wall for 4 hours at a stretch, in front of an audience of pigeons and a cabbage cart. I stood across the yard with a coffee going cold in my hand, and I watched him for an hour and 11 minutes. He never once looked at me. He knew I was there, of course he knew. That man knew where every living thing in that yard was, and he never once let me exist. And I understood, finally, what I had recorded at the sentry box. Kesh had stood in front of that man for 11 minutes and told him he was furniture, and the whole point of it, the entire mechanism of that man's life, was that Kesh was right and it did not matter. He was furniture. That was the job. He had chosen a life in which he would be looked at by 10,000 people a day and seen by none of them, in which he would be mocked and poked and photographed and shouted at, and never, not once, be permitted the smallest human satisfaction of an answer. He had given up the right to answer. He had handed it in like a kit item, and he stood there without it in the rain. They had taken away his crowd, his rope, his forecourt, his gates, his place at the head of the column. They had put him behind the cabbages so that the realm would not have to look at him. And he was standing exactly as he had stood on the Kingsway, not sulking, not slouched, not 1 degree off, the same man at the same standard in front of nobody at all. I had spent my whole working life around people who behaved well when the light was on them. I had never in my life seen a man behave well when it was off. At 10 o'clock the relief came, and there was the little formal dance of it, and Imrais Tarn came off the post and walked across the yard towards the barrack door, and I got in front of him. "Guardsman Tarn." He stopped, he looked at me. Off the post the eyes were different, tired, brown, quite ordinary. "My name is Corin Ashby," I said. "I was the cameraman on the Kingsway, I filmed it." Nothing happened in his face. "I filmed all of it," I said. "From before he stepped over the rope, 4 minutes 1 take from low down, I have it, I still have it." And I waited for him to say the thing that would have made it easy. "Give it to them, save me, you have to, anything." "Then that's your business, sir," said Imrais Tarn, "and none of mine. They've suspended you." "They have. They're saying you assaulted him. They're saying it on every screen in the realm." "I know what they're saying." He shifted the rifle. "Was there something else, sir?" "Doesn't it?" I heard my own voice go up and hated it. "Does it not make you angry?" And Guardsman Imrais Tarn looked at me for a moment with something that might, at a distance, in bad light, have been pity. "There were 1,100 people on that street," he said. "They all went home, so did he." He put his cap straight, which did not need straightening. "It came out right, sir. What's there to be angry about?" He went past me to the barrack door. I stood in the tradesmen's yard in the rain for a long time after that. Here is the thing about courage that nobody puts in the films I make. It is not a moment. It is an accountancy. I sat up that night with my bank ledger on one side of the table and the card on the other, and I did the sums, because a man who says he did not do the sums is lying to you. I had 4,000 crowns. I had a rented room above a print shop. I had a sister in the West with 2 children and a husband who had been 3 years out of work, and I sent her what I could every month, and what I could was the difference between a bad winter and a very bad one. I had a trade in which every job comes from a man who knows a man, and in which a whisper, he stole from a client, he sold his footage, he can't be trusted in the room, travels faster than any train in the realm and arrives before you do. Perrin Slade had not threatened me. Slade had simply told me the price, in numbers I could check, and then he had left the arithmetic on the table like a loaded thing, and he had been quite right that the truth was on both sides of it. I could hand over the card and be a witness and be ruined. I could hand over the card and be a thief and be ruined. Those are the same sentence. It took me 11 days to see that they are the same sentence, and that the only word in it I got to choose was the one in the middle. I made a copy, 2 copies. I put one in a bank box under my own name and one in an envelope addressed to Captain Lyle Orrick, Palace Guard, and I gave the envelope to my landlord's wife with instructions to post it if I did not come and take it back within the month. And then I did the arithmetic one more time, and I lost my nerve, and I did nothing at all. For 11 days I did nothing at all. I want that written down, because when this story is told in the taverns I am the man who came forward, and I know exactly what I am, and I am the man who came forward 11 days late. The household tribunal opened on a Tuesday, in the long chamber, under a ceiling painted with a hunt that has been going on for 400 years, and has still not caught anything. It was not a criminal court. That is a distinction people never grasp. The Crown's prosecution of Kesh for obstruction sat parked and waiting. What came first, because Kesh's complaint demanded it, was the household's own inquiry into the conduct of guardsman Imrais Tarn, whether he had assaulted a civilian, whether he had broken the standing orders of the column, and whether he was fit to remain in the palace guard. In other words, the man who had been thrown clear had contrived it so that the man who threw him clear went on trial first. Presiding was the Princess Adela. I had never seen her. Like everyone, I had an idea of her, and the idea was wrong. She was in her 60s, in dark red, and she came in without ceremony and sat without arranging herself and looked around the chamber once slowly, the way a farmer looks at a field. As warden of the household, she had presided over these things for 30 years, and it was said in the city that she had broken a marshal of the horse and a lord chamberlain, and had once, memorably, told her own brother the king to sit down and wait his turn. She said, "This is an inquiry, not a spectacle. The doors will stay open, because a thing done behind a closed door is a thing half done. But this bench will decide what happened on the Kingsway on the 11th of April, and it will decide it on evidence, and it will not decide it on what has been shouted at us for 3 weeks by people who were not there. Advocate Slade, you may open." And Perrin Slade opened, and he was magnificent, and he did not raise his voice once. He did not call Imrais Tarn a thug. He was far too clever for that. He called him a good man in a bad system, a servant of an institution that had ossified, a soldier trained to a rule so old that nobody living could remember why it was made, and who had, in the fraction of a second available to him, applied that rule to a living human being and put him on his knees on the stones. He was gentle with Tarn. He was ruthless with the guard. And he built, brick by brick, in front of an open chamber and 100 journalists, the case that a realm which permits 52 armed men to walk through a stationary citizen has stopped being a realm and started being a machine. Then he played the 9 seconds, on a screen the size of a wall. He played it 4 times. They called Sella Quint on the 2nd day, and they destroyed her. I sat in the public gallery and watched it happen, and there was nothing I could do, and I have never felt so exactly like a coward in my life, because there was in fact one thing I could do, and it was in a bank box across the city. She gave her evidence well. She gave it plainly. 3 warnings, the rope, the radio call. She held up 3 fingers to show the tribunal how she had held up 3 fingers on the street, and the gesture in that vast painted room looked small and foolish, and I saw one of the journalists smirk. Then Perrin Slade stood up and said he had only a very few questions, and he was so kind to her that it took the chamber several minutes to notice she was bleeding. Marshal Quint. 19 years, a hard post. It's my post. Indeed, and in 19 years you have been formally reprimanded once. Is that right? Oh, yes. Would you tell the bench what for? She lifted her chin. For striking a man. For striking a man, Slade repeated sorrowfully. In the discharge of your duties, 11 years ago on the Kingsway, you struck a member of the public. He was going over the rope with a... He was, I think the report says, moving towards the column, and you struck him. I pulled him back and he swung at me and I put him down. He was drunk and he weighed 16 stone. And you were reprimanded for it. I was, she said. And I'd do it again tomorrow. Yes, said Perrin Slade softly. I rather think you would, and he sat down, and the whole chamber understood that he had just made his case for him, that the Kingsway is policed by people who put men on the ground, and that they do it because it is in the nature of the thing, and that they would do it again tomorrow. She came down from the stand with her back straight. She looked once at the gallery at me, and then she went out through the great doors, and I heard afterwards that she was stood down from the rope line that same evening, pending the finding, and that she went home and cleaned her whole house from top to bottom and did not sleep. On the third day, the broadsheet said the household's case was in ruins. On the fourth, the Commons bench opened a debate on the standing orders of the palace guard. On the fifth, the Crown's advocate, a decent, overmatched man named Hollis Marlowe, was seen coming out of the long chamber grey in the face. And on the evening of the fifth day, they offered Rise Tarn the door. I know what was in the room because Captain Oric told me afterwards, and because Oric, who was in it, has never in his life bothered to make himself sound better than he was. They put it to Tarn very reasonably: 20 years' service, an honorable discharge backdated, the full pension uncontested, a written commendation for the file that nobody outside the household would ever read. And in exchange, a resignation, effective at once, and an agreed statement in which the household would accept that the column's standing orders did not adequately provide for the safety of members of the public, and would regret the injury and would settle Mr. Kesh's suit quietly, and the whole thing would go away, and no finding would ever be entered against any man's name. It was not a betrayal. I want to be fair, because I have been unfair to enough people in this account. It was a decent offer from decent men who could count, and what they could count was that they were losing, and that if they lost outright the bench might be forced to find that guardsman Rise Tarn had assaulted a civilian, and that finding would follow him into his grave. Take the door, they said. Take it while it is still open. And Rise Tarn, 19 years, 6 of them in the line regiments, standing at attention in a small room in front of 2 officers and a lord of the household, said, "If I sign that, sir, then the next time a man stands on that mark, the column will stop." Nobody said anything. "That's all it means," he said. "It doesn't mean I go home. It means the next column stops, and there'll be a crowd 8 deep on that street, sir, and they'll run in." He looked at the wall. "I was at Belgate. I was 9. My father carried a woman up those steps with her leg the wrong way round, and I held her hat. He asked permission to withdraw. He was given it. And in the doorway he turned round and said the only thing he ever said to any of them about the whole affair, which Captain Oric repeated to me with a very strange expression on his face. I'd have thrown him clear if he'd been a lord or a beggar, sir. I don't need them to know that. But you might want to make sure it's true of the next man in that file, because the next man's the one it matters for." Part 5, 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I took the card out of the bank box on a Thursday morning with my hands shaking so hard I dropped it twice on the marble floor, and I walked it across the city to the long chamber, and I gave my name at the door and asked to be heard. I did not tell anyone I was coming, not Oric, not Marlowe, nobody. If I had told them, they would have prepared me, and if they had prepared me, I would have had time to be sensible, and being sensible was the enemy. They kept me in an anteroom for 6 hours. Around noon, Nils Garrow came in. He had a smile on him like a wet coat. "Corin, mate, what are we doing?" I did not answer him. "You know what's on the other side of that door," he said. "You know what he'll do. He isn't angry with you yet. Get up, walk out. We'll say you came to deliver the media as per contract, and that's the end of it, and you'll work again. Go away, Nils. You'll never hold a camera." "Then I'll hold something else," I said, and I was astonished to hear how steady it came out, and I want to be truthful. It came out steady because I had passed the point where I could have chosen, hours ago, and there is a great calm on the far side of that. They called me at 3:30. I remember the room from the box, the painted hunt on the ceiling, the rail under my hands, the long dark benches, Slade in his seat with his spectacles folded, Kesh behind him with his heeled hands flat on the table, and the Princess Adela at the bench with her chin on 2 fingers. "You are Corin Ashby." "I am, ma'am." You were employed by the complainant. I was, ma'am. I was employed on the 11th of April, and I was on the Kingsway that morning at his instruction, and I filmed the whole of it. The bench has heard, said Adela, that no continuous record exists. A continuous record exists, ma'am, I said. It is in my pocket. It is 4 minutes and 11 seconds long, from before Mr. Kesh stepped over the rope until after he was helped up off the cobbles, in a single take, from a kneeling position at the rope line on the eastern side, and it has not been cut, and it has not been graded, and there is not one frame missing from it. Parent Slade rose. He did it slowly. He was not flustered. I have never seen that man flustered, and I do not believe it is possible, but he took his time, and he was very precise, and what he did was reach across the table and put one hand flat on the contract. Ma'am, before this bench receives that media, it must satisfy itself of a matter of ownership. Mr. Ashby is not a witness offering his own property. He is a contractor in flagrant breach of an assignment clause, disposing of media that belonged to my client from the instant of capture, and I say with regret that the moment he hands that card across, he commits a theft in open court, and this tribunal becomes the receiver of stolen goods. The chamber made a sound. Princess Adela looked at Slade for a while, then she looked at me. Mr. Ashby, is what he says correct? Is that card his client's property? And here is where I discovered what I had actually come to do, which was not what I thought. Yes, ma'am, I said. It's his. I signed it away. I read the clause and I signed it, and I took his money, and I would do it again for the money because I needed it, and I have spent 11 days trying to find a way to be honest without paying for it, and there isn't one. I put the card on the rail. So I'm not offering the bench my property. I'm handing over stolen goods, and I'll take what's coming. Mr. Slade is right about the law, and I don't dispute a word of it. But he's been telling this room for a fortnight that no continuous record exists, and he has been sitting 18 inches from the man who owns it and had it destroyed, and I'd like the bench to look at the 4 minutes before it looks at me. Nobody spoke. Ma'am, said Slade, the media is inadmissible. Advocate Slade, said the Princess Adela, your client has come to this realm and asked us to sit in judgment on the honor of a man. He will not now tell me what I may look at while I do it. The bench will receive the media. Mr. Ashby's conduct is a separate matter, and I promise you it will not be forgotten. She turned her head very slightly. Play it. It ran on the same wall-sized screen that had shown the 9 seconds. I could not watch the screen. I stood at the rail and watched the room instead, and I have never been more glad of any decision in my life, because I got to see it happen on their faces. 4 minutes and 11 seconds is a very long time in a silent room. It begins with a boot, then the man and the coat and the crowd behind the rope and the mark in the stone, then Sella Quint, arriving in 4 strides, and every person in that chamber who had watched her bleed on the stand 2 days before had to sit and listen to her, in the flat, cold voice of the real morning, saying, Sir, behind the rope, please. Behind the rope, please. Then the first warning, then Ostry white as a candle, then the second, then Bloy laughing. Then a long, slow, dreadful minute in which nothing happens except that the red at the end of the Kingsway becomes men, and the drums come up out of the stone, and the crowd's noise changes, and a woman's voice somewhere off camera says, quite clearly, oh, he's not going to, he's not, is he? Then Sella Quint's 3 fingers in the air. Then Doran Kesh, in close and sharp and lit like a coin, turning to the phones and saying, they'll go around me, everything goes around me, and if I break anything, I'll pay for it. I watched the Princess Adela's face when that line landed. Nothing moved. That is all I will say about it. Nothing moved, and it was the most frightening thing I saw all year. Then the shouts, make way for the guard, twice, and then the third one with the crack in it. Then Kesh closing his eyes. And then, because the camera was low, on one knee, at the rope, under the line of the bearskins, at the only angle in the whole capital from which you could possibly have seen it, the 4 inches. They stopped the film there. The clerk froze it on Adela's raised hand. And there on a screen 20 feet wide in the last third of a second of Doran Kesh's old life was Guardsman Imrise Tarn, eyes forward, rifle at the slope, boots in perfect time with 51 other men, and his right shoulder dropped and rolling and coming up. "Advocate Marlowe," said the Princess Adela, "explain to me what I am looking at." Holly's Marlowe got to his feet, and I will say for the man that he did not gloat, and he did not hurry, and he had been waiting 3 weeks to be able to say this. "You are looking, ma'am, at a breach of the standing orders of the palace guard," he said. "The order is exact. In the event of an obstruction on the way, the file shall maintain formation, alignment, and pace, and shall not deviate, not a hand's breadth. That is the wording, and it is 400 years old, and it is written the way it is written because at Belgate a file deviated to save 1 man and 31 people were carried off those steps." He turned and looked at the frozen screen. Guardsman Tarn deviated. He dropped his shoulder 4 inches out of the line, and he rolled it, and he lifted, and he kept his pace and his alignment, and the line held, but he deviated, and he knew he was deviating, and he did it in the 1/5 of a second available to him, and he has never once in 3 weeks offered it to this bench in his own defense, because to offer it would be to admit that he broke his order. "And what did the deviation accomplish?" said Adela. "It threw Mr. Kesh clear, ma'am," said Marlowe, "sideways, out of the center line, a full body's length off the mark, onto open cobbles in front of a stationary crowd in one movement. And had he not deviated, had he kept his shoulder square as his orders require?" Marlowe was quiet for a moment. "Then Mr. Kesh would have gone down under the front rank, ma'am," he said, "and there were 12 ranks behind it, and no man in any of them could have seen him." I looked at Doran Kesh. He had not moved. His healed hands were still flat on the table in front of him. He was looking at the screen, at the shoulder, at the 4 inches, at the 1/5 of a second, and there was a thing happening in his face that I have never been able to name, and I have spent a long time trying. It was not shame. Shame came later, and shame is survivable. He was watching a stranger save his life on a wall in front of 200 people, and he was understanding in real time at the age of 51 that the entire architecture of his existence, the one great sentence of commerce, the wall and the wave, the world that had gone around him since he was 22 had been wrong, not wicked, wrong, factually, provably, 4 inches of shoulder wrong. He had spent 3 weeks and a fortune, and the name he had built for 51 years, demanding the destruction of the only man on that street who had done anything for him at all. And Perrin Slade, who was the finest advocate in the world, and who had never in his career been handed a fact he could not turn, leaned over and spoke into his client's ear. And Doran Kesh said, out loud, in a voice that carried to the back of the chamber, "Don't." Slade stopped. "Don't," Kesh said again. He put his hands on the table and stood up slowly like a man twice his age. "Ma'am, do I have leave to speak?" "You do not," said the Princess Adela. "You have advocates and you will use them." "Then I dismiss them." The chamber came apart. It took the clerk half a minute to get it back, and when it was back, Perrin Slade was still standing there with his hand on his client's chair, and I would give a great deal to know what he was thinking. "Mr. Kesh," said Adela, "sit down. You are not making a gesture in my chamber." "No, ma'am," said Kesh. "I'm withdrawing a complaint." "Sit down." He sat down. "I withdraw the complaint against Guardsman Tarn," he said to the table, "and the suit, both, and I'd like it entered that they were false when I made them and that I knew—" His voice went. He put his hand over his mouth for a second, and then he took it away and he said it. "That I knew he never struck me. I knew it on the cobbles. I knew it while I was on my knees and I pointed at him. I didn't know what he'd done. But I knew what he hadn't done, and I said it anyway, because there were cameras, and because I have never in my life been able to be seen losing." He looked up at the bench, and he was, I think, for the first time in perhaps 40 years, entirely without a plan. "I'll take whatever comes," he said, "but not from him, don't take it out of him. He's the only one on that whole street who did his job." Part 6. What the Stone Remembers. The Princess Adela did not give her finding that day, and she did not give it the next. She sat for 11 more days, and she called 16 more witnesses, and she made the household bring her the Belgate report and read the injured list into the record, all 31 names, out loud, in an open chamber, which took 9 minutes and which not one journalist in that room ever forgot. Then she found that guardsman Imrais Tarn had not assaulted Doran Kesh, and that the allegation was false, and that it was known to be false by the man who made it. She found that guardsman Tarn had deviated from the standing orders of the column by a hand's breadth, in a fifth of a second, under a duty no order can extinguish, and that the deviation had preserved both the line and the life of the obstruction, and that the bench declined to censure him for it. And then she did something nobody expected. She did not simply excuse the 4 inches. She wrote them into the order. The Kingsway standing orders were amended that summer. The column still does not stop, and it does not break, and it does not go around. It never will, and after Belgate no sane realm would ask it to. But there is a new clause at the foot of the page now, and it is the shortest clause in the book, and every man in the front rank learns it in his first week. The file shall not deviate, the file may clear. 4 words of law, bought with a man's whole career, and he never asked for them. Seliquent was restored to the rope line with a commendation, which she accepted the way she accepted everything, and she told the clerk that she would like the 11-year-old reprimand left on her record where it was, because it was true and she had earned it, and she was not going to start tidying up her life at 58. She walks the Kingsway still. She is the only person in the capital who has ever made me stand up straighter by saying good morning. Nils Garrow's 9 seconds were traced to his own machine, time-coded, layer by layer, by a household clerk who did it in a single afternoon and clearly enjoyed himself. And the finding on that occupies 4 sentences and ends the working life of a very clever man. Perrin Slade withdrew from the matter with a letter of 2 lines and paid his own costs and has never spoken publicly about it, and I have come round, slowly and against my will, to a kind of respect for him. He never told a lie in that chamber. He simply built a true wall out of true bricks in front of a true thing, which is a trade, and it is legal, and he was the best in the world at it. And he stopped the moment he saw what was behind the wall. That is more than I did. I saw it for 11 days. Doran Kesh was convicted of obstruction of a royal column and fined 200 crowns. 200. The same 200 that Captain Lyle Orrick had offered him across a scarred table in a stone room with the door open, on the morning it happened, before any of it existed. He was also convicted of laying a false complaint against a servant of the crown, which is not a 200-crown matter. He served 4 months. His trade charter was refused by the Commerce Office in a letter of 1 paragraph that did not bother to be cruel. 2 of his banks withdrew, and his partners in the Republic bought him out of his own company at a price that the broadsheets there described as merciful, and Farron Ostry, who had begged him on the stones, was the man who signed the papers. He kept the ships. He had in the end about 1/3 of what he came with, which is more than most men have and less than nothing to a man who has never been able to be seen losing. And I was charged with the theft of the media, exactly as Perrin Slade had promised. I pleaded guilty because I was. Princess Adela heard it herself and did not spare me a syllable. She said that a man who sells his eyes to a bidder should not expect to be thanked when he finally opens them, and that the 11 days I had spent doing sums were 11 days in which an innocent man stood at a back gate behind the cabbages, and that the bench had noticed. She fined me 1 crown. 1. She said the sum was chosen with care, and that I could look at it for the rest of my life and decide what it was worth. I have not worked for a wealthy man since. That is not a moral position, It is a market condition. The men who hire cameras all knew what I did, and none of them will ever have me in a room again, and they are, I think, quite right. I work for the household record office now, at a clerk's wage, and what I do all day is dull beyond description. I film the change of the guard from a fixed position. I film ceremonies and inspections and the arrival of ambassadors. There is no money in it, and there is no glory in it, and my hands have never been steadier. The king came to the Kingsway in September. It was not announced. There was no dais and no press pen, and the first anyone knew of it was a plain motor car at the Barrack Arch and King Alaric getting out of it in a gray coat, alone but for two men, and walking down the length of the guard's walk with his hands behind his back like any old man taking the air. He stopped at the mark. The crowd behind the rope did not, at first, entirely believe it. Then it did, and it made the noise a crowd makes, and Sella Quint led it, and the king stood on the pale groove in the stone and looked down at it for a while. He said, and I have it, because I was there with a fixed camera and a clerk's wage, and it is in the household record, and anyone may see it, he said. They tell me this is where the gentleman stood. Nobody answered him. When I was a boy, said King Alaric, I was taught that this way is the crown's. I have thought about that a great deal these last months, and I no longer think it is true. It is not mine. It has never been mine. It belongs to the 1,100 people who were on it at Belgate, and to the 31 who did not walk home, and to every marshal who has ever pulled a drunk back off this stone and gone home without a thank you. He looked up the length of the Kingsway to the forecourt gates. The men who march it are not walking through you. They are the reason you are able to stand there and watch them and be bored by them and make your jokes. That is what discipline is for. It is not a costume and it is not a cruelty. It is a promise, made in advance to people who will never know it was kept. Then he went to the forecourt and inspected the guard, which took 11 minutes, and he stopped in front of one man in the front rank and said something that no camera in the realm picked up. And guardsman Imrais Tarn, restored to public duty, restored to the column, restored to the head of the Kingsway on a Tuesday morning, did not move a hair, and did not answer, and looked through his king at a point on the far wall exactly as he had looked through Doran Kesh. Which, when I have thought about it, is the whole of him. There is a last thing, and then I have done. In the spring, a year near enough from the boot on the mark, I was filming the change of the guard from my fixed position at the Belgate steps, and I saw a man in the crowd. He was thinner. His coat was ordinary. He stood behind the rope in the third row with his hat in his hands, and he did not push and he did not speak, and nobody knew him, because a man without 40 ships is not a face, he is just a man in a coat. The drums came up under the bell tower, and Doran Kesh, who had lost his charter, his company, his name, and 4 months of his life on the strength of 9 seconds he had paid a clever man to make, stepped back off his own foot, 2 full paces, hard against the people behind him, to make room he did not need to make, on a pavement 40 feet from a stone he was never going to stand on again. He put his hat over his heart. He stood there like that, while 52 men came down the guard's walk in step with the sun on the brass and the drums folding back off the old walls, and I watched him through the finder and I did not zoom in, and I am glad of that. When the column had gone through the gates he put his hat back on and stood a while longer, and then he walked away up the Kingsway with the rest of the crowd, and I have never seen him since. I did not follow him. I had nothing to ask him and nothing to say, and in any case my post was the camera, and the camera does not leave the post. But I have thought often about the man who could not be seen losing, standing bareheaded in the third row of a crowd where nobody knew his name, giving way to a column that did not know he was there. It cost him everything he had to learn it. And they never even had to break step. Some of it he could have had for 200 crowns and 1 written line, on the morning it happened, in a stone room with the door open. The rest of it, the 4 inches, the 1/5 of a second, the shoulder that dropped out of the line to throw a stranger clear, The rest of it he could never have bought at any price, from any man, in any market in the world. It was given to him for nothing, by a man in a red tunic who would not have crossed the street to hear him say thank you. That is what I filmed on the 11th of April on the Kingsway at 9 minutes past 10 in the morning. It took me 11 days to look at it. I have been looking at it ever since.